Hey twin. So, I wanted to say real quick, so I did another video and I thought that I had sent it, but I guess not. And so it got to the point where I was like, well, I may as well just do a different one because it's that time and there's more relevant things now, and I can include responses to the things that you've talked about a little bit. So I wanted to respond to a couple of things that you mentioned during your video, just little tidbits that jumped out here and there at me. First of all, the Les Mis spoilers that someone complained about. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure we remember laughing about someone mentioning Final Fantasy VII spoilers or Dragon Ball spoilers, like, oh, yeah, by the way, Eris dies, and stuff that's been out in media for long enough. I think we've become pretty good at having a protective bubble for like the first month or two, but after that, it's anyone's game. You can't expect people to not talk about the new Star Wars movie for that long. You can't expect people to not talk about the new Game of Thrones episode for more than a week after it's out. You're just being unrealistic at that point. So I got a good laugh out of that. When you brought it up, I also remembered your Gundam Wing theme song for your ringtone. I haven't watched that show in so many years, but I very distinctly remember that, and it made me smile knowing that you still got that as a ringtone. It really spoke to me what you said about feeling like you have a duty to contribute to the political process as a young person. I feel like we all have a duty as individuals to try to make the world a better place in some way, in some capacity. And there are so many different things that you can do regarding that. There are so many different ways. We all have our talents and our uniqueness, and we have our passions. And I think one way that we can make the world a better place is by pursuing those things that we are passionate about and making contributions there. Because if it's something that we love, other people love it too. And we have a capability of giving back to that, to whatever it is that we care about, and ultimately making it better and stronger. And I feel the same way you do about the political process. I feel that way about gaming and the gaming community, which is super, super toxic and difficult to work with sometimes, but I feel like there's a lot that can be done there. One thing that bothers me is how much a Metacritic score weighs on the success of a game or even a movie. A piece of media that winds up getting a poor Metacritic score oftentimes will wind up getting significantly less sales than ones that have better scores. I feel like getting involved with that and getting involved with the analysis side of gaming is a way that I can give back to it. And I feel like I have a responsibility as someone who is passionate about this process to try to do what I can to contribute to it. So I'm 100% there with you in that feeling, in that feeling of duty and responsibility. So you came back afterwards and you had a little amendment, pun there, on your video. Um, Obviously, it's all anyone's talking about right now are the protests. And I think I think most reasonable and rational people are so appalled and disappointed. These are people that are unabashedly Nazis. This isn't like Nazis. These are Nazis. It's not covered up under the guise of anything else. It is what it is, and it's so frightening and disturbing. And the Tiki company took to Twitter, I believe, to make sure that everyone understood that they did not provide those torches, which, by the way, look completely ridiculous, and that they did not support that message of hatred or bigotry. It's so upsetting that we have a more powerful message from the Tiki Torch Company than we do our own president, who says that there was violence and hatred on both sides, who says that both sides are to blame. And I just cannot look at it that way. And I can't continue to look at situations like this as, well, you need to take the higher ground. I can't take the higher ground anymore, and I can't respect those people's opinions because their opinion is that we are worth less than they are. You can't respect the opinions or just hear out the other side when the other side wants you to come to harm. That's completely unrealistic. And you can't expect millions of people to just literally lay down and die because a bunch of butthurt white dudes feel like they don't have as strong of a voice anymore. And in all honesty, they don't, because the world is becoming more progressive and times have changed. Women can vote, black people can vote, gay people can get married. And we're going to come to a day where trans people can pee wherever they feel like they're supposed to. And right now, there is so much turmoil, and it's so upsetting to see that we do not have someone that can make sense of this situation and take a side, at the very least. I had to touch on that really quickly because it's gone around everywhere, and thankfully I haven't seen anyone in my circle of friends, anyone on my Facebook supporting that. I, back in November, pretty much decided that it was time to just start cutting people out. I cut people out pretty easily. But I think when you're talking about people that think you don't deserve the same basic human rights, it's suddenly, strangely becomes okay to go, perhaps someone who thinks that I don't deserve the same rights as they do, perhaps that person doesn't belong on my friends list on Facebook. Anyway, personal things going on in my life. I had a little bit of life drama last week. It kind of starts week before, where I had a couple of things come in the mail. Um, or I had a couple of orders go out, rather. And one of them was, it's weird, one of them was in Japan, and that one went through just fine. And then one of them was in Europe. It was for the pink and green Joy-Cons for the Nintendo Switch because they're not coming out in the States here. Well, my pre-order transaction went through and my bank canceled it because they saw it as fraud because it was from the UK. And I'm confused because I pre-ordered it from Game and they're like a verified seller. And I pre-order stuff and order import games and whatnot with some amount of frequency. I would think that my bank would recognize that. So I got upset because the pre-orders were sold out. I had to take to eBay to find a set of those because I really wanted them. And it was just a mess and I was unhappy. So irony, the very next week, I go to use my debit card at Subway and it declines. And I think to myself, that's really weird because I've got thousands of dollars in there. I'm saving for a house right now. So I don't think much of it. I use my other card. Sometimes those machines are just weird. Things happen, whatever. So I notice an email from Chase that day, and I see that there's been fraudulent activity on my account, actual fraudulent activity. So I call them on my break. Someone got a hold of my debit card information somehow, and it wasn't local because all the stuff that they tried to use it with was up in like Chicago, New York, places I either haven't been or haven't been to in a decade. And they're reading all of the transactions off to me. There were 129 transactions in one day. I, of course, don't have to pay for any of that, thankfully, and it's all taken care of. I got a new card and everything, but I kind of had to laugh because I was so upset about the fraudulent charges for something I wanted to buy and being angry. How dare you stop my account on something I was actually trying to buy? And then less than a week later, shenanigans with that. So that was funny for me. So Sonic Mania comes out tomorrow, which I'm very excited for, and I could basically make a whole video talking about that, which I might do next week. So I'm going to skim over that, but needless to say, I'm very, very excited. My collector's edition should be coming in the mail for that. I've seen the stuff that's in it, and it looks so, so cool, so I might make an unboxing video just for anyone who wants to watch it. One thing I wanted to touch on really quickly, though, some interesting trivia you may or may not like, but relevant to your interests and your previous gaming experience. So lately I have been very, very active on Final Fantasy XIV, which is the other Final Fantasy MMO after Final Fantasy XI. So Final Fantasy XIV, as it exists today, is not the same Final Fantasy XIV that was initially launched. Final Fantasy XIV is currently up to 4.05, I want to say, but for the sake of simplicity, most people will just call it 4.0. 4.0 is the newest expansion, Stormblood. 3.0 was the last expansion, Heavensward. And 2.0 is Final Fantasy: A Realm Reborn, which is what the current state of the game is called. Final Fantasy 1.0 was what initially launched back when it first came out. So that game is almost completely different from what we're currently playing. It was taken off of the internet. The servers were taken down after A Realm Reborn was launched. It was basically the one game Square Enix has apologized for. It was the Devil May Cry 2 of Square Enix. It was a very poorly optimized game. It ran on the same game engine that Square Enix had actually designed for Final Fantasy XIII. So right there, though, that should pull up a few red flags, because Final Fantasy XIII, while it was a very good-looking game for the PS3, it was a single-player game, and at no time was it intended for there to be dozens and dozens or even hundreds of character models on screen simultaneously. You know, a game like Final Fantasy XIII and a game like Dynasty Warriors run on very different engines. Dynasty Warriors has so many different character models simultaneously, and they are admittedly lower resolution and lower polygon. They have to be for systems to be able to run them. So there were issues with the game just running at all. If you go to look up gameplay video of 1.0, it almost always looks like it's playing in slow motion, just constantly, all the time. One of the big offenders of this, and this is so amusing to me, were these items that were placed all throughout the cities and indeed all throughout the world. They were responsible for massive slowdown, people's games crashing. It was ridiculous. They were flower pots. They looked like these big barrels with flowers sticking out of the top. So not exactly typical flower pots, like maybe kind of what a flower vendor would have. Like, okay, you go to this NPC to get a quest, and it's a flower merchant, and they've got some of these, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. But these were everywhere. I mean, everywhere in the cities. Someone on the dev team had a massive boner for these stupid flower pots, and the issue with them was they had the same number of polygon counts as player character models, and they were everywhere. And then players were everywhere because this is a Final Fantasy game. So there were definite performance issues with that right there. It wasn't even just the architecture of the game, though. So the way that the game was designed was in such a way that you were basically penalized for playing it too much. They made this game punish you for wanting to continue playing it. The two biggest offenders were fatigue. So normally in an MMO, you earn 100% of your normal experience all the time. And then some MMOs have rested experience where after you've logged off for a while, you come back on and you can gain experience more quickly, usually 50 or 100% faster until you run out of that rested experience. And in practice, that's similar to fatigue, but not all the same. So with the fatigue system, you earn 100% experience until you've been playing it for too long, and then the amount of experience you earn starts to taper off more and more and more until it comes to a crawl, until it comes to a complete stop, and you can't keep getting experience. For one, even if it didn't completely stop your experience, or if it only slowed it down to a reasonable amount, it still had been designed in such a way that it looked much worse than rested and normal experience. But beyond that, it made the game completely unplayable. You couldn't progress once you got to that point. And Square's reasoning was that they didn't want hardcore players to pass up casual players too quickly. And it just wasn't a great way of implementing that. The other issue with it that would punish you for playing the game too much was the traveling system. So I hesitate to use the word sprawling with their maps because sprawling makes it sound like it was vast and expansive and albeit actually fun to explore. Their maps were very monotonous. They had a lot of land features that were copy-pasted, repeated all across the map. It looked like someone using RPG Maker with very nice graphics, but very little history designing game maps. And some of the maps, the Black Shroud especially, if you want to Google that one, was downright labyrinthian. There was nothing open about it. There was no way that traversing it made any sense, and they didn't even give you any mini-maps, too. You had to constantly bring up the map through the use of a very clunky menu system. And the worst thing about this, point I'm trying to get to, is that there was very limited means of traveling quickly. So one big offender right out of the gate is there are no chocobos for players to use. Yeah, this is a Final Fantasy game without chocobos. And it's not even just that they don't exist in that world. There are chocobo stables in the major cities, but you can't rent them. You can't own them. They were an unfinished part of the game when it launched, and it did launch too quickly. Worse still, the fast travel system is very, very unforgiving. So in order to use the fast travel in 1.0, you would use this fast travel currency, I believe crystals. It cost 4 of them to travel to a nearby area and 6 of them to travel to a faraway area. Not such a big deal, right? But to regain 1 of those crystals took hours of waiting. I forget exactly what number. I want to say it was at least 5. Let's shave that off a little bit and say 4 hours to regenerate 1 of those crystals. That means it would take 16 hours to be able to fast travel to a close-by destination, and an entire day to fast travel someplace far away. That's absolutely ridiculous. So, like some of the really, truly old and decrepit MMOs, there was a lot of slugging across very large, empty, repetitive maps. These and a whole bunch of other problems with the game made it very unplayable and very inaccessible. A lot of the issues that gamers had with it were actually relayed to the staff. There were alpha forums and beta forums, there was constant feedback, and for a large amount of the time, their complaints were laughed at and shrugged off as that just being the design of the game. But obviously, eventually, Square Enix wisened up and decided that they couldn't continue supporting a game that people did not want to play. So the staff was completely changed out, and the game was basically remade from the ground up into A Realm Reborn, as we know now. I think I forgot to mention earlier, but the staff of Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 It's actually the entire same staff as Final Fantasy XI. I think that was probably a bad idea, but anyway, I've rambled long enough. I hope that you're doing well. I wish you luck on all of your projects and all of your school, and I look forward to hearing back from you and hearing about what's going on in your life. Good luck!